Welcome to the Capital Forum's Antitrust Thought Leader interview series. I'm Teddy Downey, executive editor here at the Capital Forum, and I'm delighted to be here today with Barry Nigro of Fried Frank. Barry really needs no introduction, but prior to rejoining Fried Frank, he served as Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General at DOJ's Antitrust Division, where he was the number 2 official responsible for all civil and criminal antitrust enforcement and litigation in the United States. Barry, thank you so much for doing this today.
Thank you, Teddy. It's great to be here.
So I think a big question on everyone's mind is the new merger guidelines. There's been some news, some pushback in the House. Would love to get your take on how you see the new merger guidelines, things you like, things you don't like, and how big of an impact you think they'll have.
Yeah, so the guidelines are a significant change from what we've had over the last 20 years. They've, in some respects, they've, incorporated and embraced a lot of the new thinking that this administration is looking to promote. They also have sort of stepped back a little bit from the most recent guidelines and adopted some of the thresholds and standards that prevailed back with the 92 guidelines. So they're new, they're different, and I think people are still working their way through them and kind of feeling out how they're going to play out in the courts, which is ultimately where these things get decided.
Yeah, and I would love to get your thoughts on like how you think these things will play out in the courts. And specifically with one of the guidelines, there, and I think the one that I don't want to say it's like most novel because it's not really
Yeah.
novel, but the incipiency, the standard, the trend toward concentration. I find that one particularly interesting, especially because it's not a super technical analysis of like exactly how things work. It's a little bit more of a let's take a step back and look at what's going on in this market and what will happen if this merger goes through. I would love to get your take on how something like that could actually make its way into litigation, or how you think about the incipiency.
I,
Uh,
I think those sorts of issues become very fact dependent. It uh, whether and the agencies can persuade a judge that uh, that a deal merits a block based on concerns related to incipiency. I think it's going to depend a lot on the facts, the internal documents. How the competitors, the acquiring company views the target, and other evidence that could be brought to bear, by the agencies in order to build a persuasive case. But they're hard cases. Just the word incipiency itself kind of highlights that you're not you're not talking about a run of the mill deal that between two horizontal competitors that eliminates existing competition, and so it they can be very challenging.
yeah, yeah. I'm really interested to see how that plays out in the courts. You were, in at DOJ during the Trump administration with Megan Delrahim when he was AAG. I'd love to get your thoughts on, if we're going to almost certainly see another Biden-Trump election. How you think, a second if Trump wins, what will happen to antitrust? What will happen to there were some consistencies, some divergence when the Biden administration took over. What you see, from a second Trump administration, were that to happen in terms of continuity and divergence from what we're seeing now.
So I don't think that you're likely to see it. What people have historically thought of as a traditional Republican approach to antitrust. I think we're in an environment where enforcers uh, on both sides have a heightened sense of concern about concentration, and I would expect with a second Trump administration that you're going to see more active enforcement than you might expect from a traditional Republican administration, and you kind of got a preview of that with Assistant Attorney General Del Rahim and his approach to things like vertical mergers. I mean, the AT&T Time Warner case, notwithstanding the outcome, was the first vertical merger case litigated in 40 years. If that case came up today, I'm fairly certain that the agencies would sue to block it. And since that case, there have been a number of vertical merger challenges that have been litigated. So it seems that you know that the current administration is really not that far apart from where Assistant Attorney General Del Rahim was on that. Behavioral remedies is another area where uh, uh, Macon, announced in November 2017 speech that he had concerns about vertical behavioral remedies and vertical merger deals. There were concerns about the ability to enforce them, and there were concerns about the volume of enforcement resources that were being used in order to address complaints as to whether parties were adhering to their obligations under the consent decrees, which were fairly viewed by some as fairly regulatory in approach. And this administration, the Biden administration, has picked up on that and run with it, and continued to show skepticism when it comes to behavioral remedies. They've now gone a step further and also, you know, begun to raise questions about the effectiveness of structural remedies. And if you go back and look at sort of the trajectory of remedy policy over the past 30 years, you'll notice that there's been a gradual tightening of the screws. I mean, if the FTC did a study in 1999 that resulted in uh, stricter approach to remedies with upfront buyers, standalone businesses. They did another study in 2017, and and the outcome of that resulted in some changes to approaches to remedies. Now, it's important to note in that 2017 study, which was uh, voted out unanimously by 2 Democrats and 1 Republican, the commission said that most of remedies are effective. So they acknowledged that, or at least had the view that remedies were working for the most part, but they weren't perfect, and there was room for improvement. Uh, but over the years, from '99 to 2017, Macon's speech in in the fall of 2017 on behavioral remedies, and now the current administration, remedy policies sort of gradually become stricter and stricter. But you know, what that's done from my perspective is it means you just need to be more proactive at the front end of transactions. You need to think through how to manage antitrust risk if there is any, and 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 it's put sort of more of a premium on getting the right counseling at the front end, rather than let's sign up the deal and then wait and see what happens and we'll deal with it later.
I actually would love to get your thoughts on. I used to talk to investment. I mean, I've talked to investment bankers over the years, and they're like, I don't pay attention to antitrust. I don't pay
Yep.
attention to antitrust. We get the deal done, then we bring the lawyers. That seems like that doesn't happen as much anymore. I'd love to get your thoughts on like how important it is for the antitrust lawyers, or the an antitrust conversation to be happening like really early on when when the deals are being structured. I mean, to your point that you just made, I mean, it seems critical.
So it's much more important now, and the reason is that the uh, potential outcomes are so variable, and in the past, if you you filed your HSR, you went through the investigatory process if there were issues that merited review, and then if there were problems, they were generally dealt with some sort of remedy, whether it was a structural divestiture remedy or behavioral remedy, as often happened in the old days, although they're still happening now at the FTC. Amgen Horizon is a good example of that. So they're not completely out of play. Uh, Now there aren't so many remedies. If you just look at DOJ, there's been only one Section 7 remedy since Jonathan Cantor was confirmed, and that's in the Assa Abloy case and came in the context of litigation. The FTC's had a number of consent decrees, but not as many as they've had in the past. So you have a situation where the outcomes are a little more stark than they have been in the past. Trying to get the agencies to work through a remedy has become much more challenging, and so if you have a deal where you've got problems that will need to be addressed, as Ryan Danks, the director of civil enforcement at the DOJ, said yesterday, you really need to, you know, what he did say was you need to find a new deal, which is pretty extreme. But you know, but what he really meant, I think, is, if you can't find a new deal, you really need to think about how you're going to address those problems up front, and then come in early, and try to, you know, work through whether there's a way to effectively remedy those problems. And so that just means that the antitrust lawyers need to be engaged early, and all of this needs to be thought through so that you haven't a vision of what the end game is at the beginning of the game. Because in the current environment, if you wait too long, some of your options could be foreclosed.
Yeah. Another area that there's some continuity between the last administration and this one is big tech. Section 2, you and Macon, or Trump administration, antitrust enforcers brought a case against Google, a case against Facebook, just landmark cases. Those have been followed up by this administration. Another Google case, Amazon case. Um, would you see that continuing? And also, I'm curious if this idea of like bringing multiple Section 2 cases against the same company is that a trend that we can expect going forward? Just because these companies are so big and such kind of conglomerates at this point, I would love to get your take on, just the sort of scrutiny of big tech continuing.
So Macon and I were recused on the Google case, but you're
Okay,
right.
yeah,
The Trump administration did bring uh, several cases against big tech, and the Biden administration has brought more, and it's all of those are in litigation right now, or about to be uh, in litigation. So it's an area where I think there's bipartisan concern, and the agencies are trying to work through how best to address those concerns. Uh, there's a tension between the desire to have more competition in these tech markets and the network effects, which everybody values by having uh, a single provider in some of these areas. There are efficiencies that come with that, and benefits, and so, the question is, how do you balance those competing concerns, and what's the appropriate level of enforcement? Uh, as for the multiple Section 2 cases, I mean, it's partly a function of what markets the agencies are focused on. So DOJ's filed two cases against Google. One was filed by the Trump administration, one by the Biden administration, but their focus is a little bit different, and they're really concerned about different markets. So but I expect, at least on the Section 2 front, if Biden wins the election, we're going to see more Section 2 cases. They're but both the FTC and the Antitrust Division are committed to reviving Section 2 enforcement. If Trump is elected, I don't know that Section 2 enforcement will continue with the same vigor, but I don't expect it to go away.
And one thing that also is has uh, was started during the Trump administration was more, I think, aggressive trade policy, and something that's kind of continued over into the Biden administration is kind of that's new is really this all of government approach to
Mm-hmm.
competition. Recently, there's been a lot of talk of trade, industrial, and competition policy. I actually think you saw a lot of that during the Trump administration. Most recently, Trump during the campaign came out against the Nippon Steel deal, which kind of involves, trade and antitrust or competition to some extent. Um, do you see those uh, policies and from a all of government approach continuing if there's a second Trump administration as well, or how do you view that kind of that trend?
So that's a big change that the Biden administration implemented through an executive order, and it's I think it's been effective in some cases in terms of getting the outcome that the administration wants. I think there are different opinions as to whether it's appropriate, given that you know some of these agencies, and in particular the independent agencies, as opposed to the well, agencies that are part of the executive branch, whether it's appropriate for them to be coordinating on that front, and so people have different views as to whether all of that makes sense. I would expect with the second Trump administration, and I'm honestly just guessing here, that some of that type of coordination will continue, but I'm not sure it'll be um, uh, with the same level of intensity that exists today. I mean, Biden was very clear that uh, the the regulatory agencies need to defer to the antitrust enforcers. Um, that concept is not entirely new. That there's always been coordination among government agencies when it came to enforcement policy, and so I don't really view that concept as new. But I think what is new is the force with which the executive branch is approaching it, and really pushing these regulatory agencies to defer to the antitrust enforcers in a way that had not been done in the past.
Okay. Last question. Drug prices. That was another area the Trump administration really wanted to crack down on. And they actually did accomplish a lot. Congress overturned their rule to, go after PBM kickbacks. So it was kind of stymied their efforts. The Biden administration has been, I guess, trying their best, but drug prices haven't. There are certain wins I think they could point to, but overall, there's no solution there yet. Would you expect, in terms of all of government crackdown, at least on pharma, to be likely to continue, or how would you expect a Trump administration to keep looking at drug prices?
It's an area where there's been a lot of attention paid, both with the Biden administration and the prior Trump administration for obvious reasons. Uh, but it's also an area where I think the government needs to be careful because the level of investment and the risk associated with some of the innovations that occur in the pharmaceutical industry, uh, you know, requires companies with the capacity to do that. And there's also a lot of innovation that occurs um, with smaller companies, and then they need distribution outlets. So some of what people have concerns about, uh, I think, may derive from maybe a lack of a comprehensive understanding of how things work and why they work the way they work, and maybe underappreciation of some of the efficiencies associated with the existing distribution system and how innovation occurs. But having said that, it's an area that gets a lot of attention because people need drugs and they need to be affordable, and the government's trying to figure out, well, how do we accomplish that without killing the goose that laid the golden egg? Because my my view is that the U.S. is ahead of the world in a lot of areas, and innovation in pharmaceuticals is one of them.
Actually, I have one more healthcare
Okay,
question.
sure.
There is a current ongoing Section 2 investigation into United Health, specifically into managed care, the Medicare Advantage side of the business. Republicans traditionally have been kind of in favor of Medicare Advantage, but I'm curious, was there any, you know, during the Trump administration, was there any? You think the way that the last antitrust administration worked uh, would be continue that investigation, or would it be, you know, you know, put in the trash can, or how would you expect if there's a Trump administration to scrutinize something like a United Health Section 2? I mean, to the extent that you can feel
Yeah, yeah,
comfortable
you're not
talking
going to be
about it.
surprised if I say that
Yeah,
I don't really feel comfortable commenting on a specific matter.
yeah, yeah.
So
No, I'm not surprised. Okay. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Always great to
thank
see
you.
you,
Yeah,
and enjoy the rest of the AVA. But thank you so
thank you,
much.
Teddy.